She started as a loyal assistant, doing the CEO's bidding without question. But when she learned to play his game, she became his biggest threat, challenging everything he believed about loyalty, power, and trust. When Maria first joined the company, she was nothing more than an eager assistant, ready to learn and willing to do whatever it took to climb the corporate ladder. She admired the CEO, Robert, who had built the company from the ground up, visionary, growing it into an empire, and she aspired to follow in his footsteps. She had heard the stories of his brilliance, his ability to turn a struggling company into one of the most successful enterprises in the industry. For years, Maria did everything she was asked to do, organizing his calendar, making travel arrangements, taking notes at meetings, and generally supporting him in any way possible. To most of the company, Maria was just another faceless assistant, saw something in her that others didn't. He valued her work ethic, her attention to detail, and most of all, her loyalty. But as Maria continued to observe Robert's leadership and the inner workings of the company, something changed. She began to see that Robert's leadership wasn't as flawless as it appeared. There were cracks in his empire, decisions that seemed more about preserving his power. Maria realized that Robert's greatest strength, his ambition, was also his greatest weakness. She also realized something even more important. She had the power to play the game in the corporate world. Just like Robert, she wasn't just another assistant. She was more capable than anyone had realized. And if she played her cards right, she could rise higher than she had ever dreamed. It all began with a conversation. Robert had called Maria into his office one afternoon to discuss an upcoming merger that would reshape the company's future. He needed her help to prepare the financial projections and strategy documents. Maria, who had been quietly observing his leadership style over the years, saw an opportunity to take on more responsibility. "Maria, I trust you with this project. I know you'll do an excellent job," Robert said. She knew that Robert was not just relying on her skills, but Maria saw he was relying on her loyalty. It was during this project that Maria realized how much influence she could wield. As she prepared the financial documents, she began to uncover inconsistencies, things that Robert had overlooked or perhaps had chosen to ignore, decisions that, if left unchecked, could lead to the company's downfall. Maria had the knowledge and the insights to see what Robert didn't, and she knew that if she played it right, she could use this information to her advantage. She didn't just want to be his assistant anymore. She wanted more. She wanted control. As the months passed, Maria's role at the company began to evolve. She wasn't just an assistant anymore. She was a trusted advisor, a key player in the company's major decisions. She started to attend high-level meetings on her for more than providing administrative support and offering her thoughts on strategy. At first, Robert was thrilled with her ideas. He didn't realize that with every meeting and every piece of advice Maria gave, she was positioning herself closer to the top. The more Maria contributed, the more Robert grew to trust her. But what Robert didn't know was that Maria was quietly building her own network of allies within the company. She had begun to gain the respect of other senior executives who were impressed by her intelligence and her ability to navigate the complexities of the business world. Maria knew that her time would come. She just had to be patient. She began to play the game with Robert, using his trust in her to her advantage. She learned his habits, his weaknesses, and his goals. She used that knowledge to position herself as the solution to the company's challenges, all while making Robert believe that he was still in control. It was a delicate dance, one that required careful manipulation and perfect timing, but Maria was playing it flawlessly. As Maria's influence grew, Robert began to notice a shift. People in the company were beginning to look at Maria differently. What had once been a relationship of mentor and mentee now felt more like a rivalry, though Robert didn't yet realize it. Maria had become a force to be reckoned with. She was no longer the assistant who took notes at meetings. She was the one giving advice, making decisions, and becoming the key to the company's success. Robert began to feel the tension. It started with small things. Maria's increasing involvement in decision-making, her ability to influence the executives, and her growing presence in high-level discussions. Robert knew he couldn't ignore it, but he didn't know how to address it. The truth was, he was beginning to fear Maria's rise. She had become a threat, not just professionally, but personally. For the first time in years, Robert was unsure of his position. He had always been the leader, the one who made the decision. But now, Maria had become his equal, and in some ways, his superior. He saw the potential for her to take his place, to surpass him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The turning point came during a crucial board meeting where Robert was expected to present the company's future vision. Maria, who had been working behind the scenes to prepare a new strategy, saw an opportunity to take control of the narrative. She knew the board was frustrated with Robert's leadership and they were looking for a fresh direction. As Robert presented his vision, Maria stood up. She had been invited to the meeting as a guest, but now she was about to make her move. She presented her own vision, one that was bold, innovative, and far more aligned with the board's goals. She used the information she had gathered, the weaknesses she had identified, and the trust she had built with the key players in the company to make her case. The room went silent. Robert, caught off guard, could only watch as Maria took control of the conversation. She spoke with confidence, her words calculated and precise. It was clear that she was no longer the assistant. She was the one in charge. When the meeting ended, her as the future of the members were buzzing with excitement about Maria's vision. Robert, on the other hand, was left reeling. He realized too late that he had underestimated Maria. The employee he had trusted most had just become his biggest rival. In the weeks that followed, Maria's rise was unstoppable. She worked tirelessly, pushing her vision forward and gaining the trust of the board and the company's key stakeholders. Robert, unable to reclaim his position, watched helplessly as Maria became the face of the company's future. In a stunning turn of events, Maria was offered the CEO position, an offer she had always known would come, but only when the time was right. She had played the game, outsmarted the very person who had once mentored her, and now she was in control. Robert, having been betrayed by the one person he trusted most, was forced to step down. In the end, gamble had cost him just his company he lost. It was his legacy. Maria had won the game, but more importantly, she had shown the world that true power comes from understanding the rules, playing them strategically, and knowing when to take control. Maria had always known that power didn't come from a title alone. It was about influence, manipulation, and knowing how to move the pieces on the board to get what you wanted. When she first arrived at the company, she was just another assistant, quiet, observant, and eager to climb the ladder. But over the years, she had learned how to play the game with precision. She had learned how to read people, how to earn their trust, and how to use that trust to her advantage. Robert, the CEO, had always been the one to make the decision. His word was law, and his vision shaped the company. But as Maria began to understand the inner workings of the business, she saw something Robert couldn't. She saw the cracks in his leadership, the weaknesses in his decision-making, and the missed opportunities that he was blind to. Maria knew that to become the true leader of the company, she had to outmaneuver Robert, not just professionally, but personally. Her rise to power wasn't about hard work alone. It was about understanding the psychology of leadership and using that knowledge to manipulate the very systems that Robert had put in place. It was about playing the game, but with a mastery that Robert could never have anticipated. At first, Maria's approach was subtle. She didn't come in guns blazing, trying to take over the company immediately. Instead, she bided her time, using her position as Robert's assistant to gain access to information that no one else had. She listened to the board members, the executives, and the clients. She took note of their preferences, their weaknesses, and their ambitions. Maria knew that in the world of business, information was power, and she had a wealth of it at her fingertips. She began to subtly influence the decisions made by Robert, not by directly challenging him, but by quietly suggesting ideas that aligned with her vision. At first, Robert didn't notice. After all, she was his most loyal employee, the one he relied on to make sure everything ran smoothly. But Maria knew that loyalty was a two-way street. She had given Robert her trust, but now it was time for him to give something back. She began to present her ideas in ways that made them seem like his. She made him feel like he was the one driving the company's future, while in reality, she was the one pulling the strings. She used her knowledge of his goals and his weaknesses to craft solutions that seemed to align perfectly with his vision, all while steering him closer to the decisions she wanted to make. As the company grew, so did the pressure on Robert to perform. His decisions were becoming more erratic, more driven by fear of failure than by strategic thinking. He had always been a bold leader, but now he was beginning to second-guess himself. The financials weren't as strong as they once had been, and the new competition was threatening the company's position in the market. Robert was grasping at straws, hoping that his old strategies would still work. Maria, on the other hand, had already moved past the old ways of doing business. She had studied the new trends in the industry, the changing demands of clients, and the evolving business landscape. She understood that to stay ahead, you had to be adaptable, willing to take risks, and willing to make tough decisions. And she knew that Robert, despite his past successes, wasn't the leader the company needed anymore. So, while Robert floundered, Maria stepped in. She took on more responsibility, and the employees began to look to her for guidance. She didn't just give orders. She listened. She understood understood their concerns, their frustrations, and their ideas for improving the company. Maria became the voice of reason, the one people turned to when Robert's decisions no longer made sense. She became the person who inspired confidence in the team, while Robert, the once great CEO, began to lose the trust of his employees. It was during a major board meeting that Maria saw her opportunity. Robert had just delivered a presentation on the company's future, but it was clear that the board wasn't impressed. His numbers were off, his vision was outdated, and his strategies lacked the boldness that the market required. The room was filled with tension, and Maria could sense that the board members were starting to question Robert's leadership. As the meeting progressed, Maria knew that this was her moment. She had already prepared a new proposal, one that addressed the very issues Robert had failed to acknowledge. She knew that if she presented it right, the board would see her as the future of the company. But Maria also knew that she had to be careful. She couldn't just take over the meeting. She had to make it seem like a natural progression, as though Robert himself had come to the same conclusion. When the meeting seemed to be winding down, Maria stood up, confidently presenting her proposal to the board. She spoke with authority, highlighting the company's weaknesses and offering solutions that were both innovative and practical. She framed her ideas as a necessary step forward, a chance to evolve and stay competitive in an increasingly difficult market. The board was immediately captivated. They saw the potential in her vision, and they saw the leadership qualities that had been missing in Robert's presentation. When Maria finished, there was a moment of silence. To speak, one after the other, expressing their support for her ideas. Robert sat in stunned silence. He had been outmaneuvered, his authority undermined in front of the very people who had once trusted him. He realized too late that Maria had played the game better than he ever could. His failure to adapt, to listen, to embrace change had cost him his position. And now, in the weeks that Maria stood at the center of the room, influence only the new leader of the company. The board officially backed her vision, and she was given more responsibility. She continued to work with Robert, but their relationship had fundamentally changed. Robert, once the man who held all the power, was now a figurehead. He made the decisions, but Maria was the one who executed them. Maria's rise was swift and inevitable. She proved herself time and again, making bold decisions, inspiring her team, and taking the company in a new direction. Her ability to navigate the corporate world, to manipulate the systems in place, and to make others believe in her vision ensured her place at the top. For Robert, the fall was swift. His reputation as a leader was tarnished, and his inability to recognize Maria's potential cost him everything. He had underestimated her, and in doing so had lost control of the very company he had built. In the end, Maria had become the CEO, and Robert, the man who had once trusted her more than anyone, had been left in the shadows of his own creation. When Maria finally took the reins, the company was at a crossroads. The board had made its decision, and the employees were waiting to see how the new CEO would lead. But Maria had won the battle, success but now guaranteed. She had to prove she was worthy of the title. She wasn't just a replacement for Robert. She was the new face of the company, and everything she did would be scrutinized. For the first time, Maria felt the full weight of leadership. It wasn't enough to have a vision. She had to implement it, inspire her team, and navigate the ever-changing tides of the business world. The stakes were higher than ever, and Maria had to show that she was not just a product of her manipulative rise to power. She had to demonstrate that she deserved the role she had fought for. But Robert, the former CEO, wasn't going to fade quietly into the background. He still held influence in the company, and Maria knew that his ego wouldn't allow him to simply step aside. His pride was wounded, and he was determined to reclaim the power he had lost. The game, it had only just begun. In the early days of Maria's leadership, she faced resistance at every turn. Though the board had officially placed her in charge, not everyone in the company was ready to accept the change. Many of Robert's loyalists still held significant positions and were hesitant to embrace her leadership style. Some were outright defiant, continuing to align themselves with Robert's outdated strategy. Maria had always been a master of manipulation, but now she was dealing with a more complex challenge: how to unite a divided company while staying true to her vision. She knew she couldn't please everyone, but she also knew that she needed to gain the trust of her team if she was going to lead successfully. She had to balance the old with the new, the familiar with the bold, and most importantly, she had to prove that her leadership wasn't just about outmaneuvering Robert, it was about taking the company in a new direction. To do this, Maria started by making small, strategic changes. She reached out to the senior executives who had once been Robert's closest allies, listening to their concerns and offering them a seat at the table. She couldn't afford to alienate the business world who held the company's fortune was in their hands. But it wasn't just about appeasing the old guard. Maria also began to implement her vision. She focused on innovation, restructuring the company to be more agile and responsive to market demand. She pushed for new projects that challenged the status quo and brought fresh opportunities to the company. Slowly, the employees began to rally behind her. The initial skepticism was replaced with admiration for her ability to lead with confidence and clarity. But just as Maria was starting to feel comfortable in her new role, Robert made his move. It wasn't long before Robert realized that Maria wasn't just a passing phase. She was a threat to his legacy. His pride wouldn't allow him to simply fade into the background, and he knew that he couldn't let Maria take full control of the company without making one final attempt to quietly undermine Maria's authority. He used his remaining influence in the company to rally some of his former allies, planting seeds of doubt about Maria's leadership. He suggested that her decisions were rash and that she lacked the experience to steer the company through the next phase of growth. Slowly, Robert's campaign of subtle sabotage began to take hold. Some executives began questioning Maria's choices, ever perceptive, and rumors of dissatisfaction within the ranks started to spread. She saw the whisper campaign and the subtle attempts to destabilize her leadership. But instead of reacting defensively, she doubled down on her commitment to the company's success. She knew that Robert was playing a game, but she was prepared to outsmart him once again. She had already proven that she could rise to the top. Now she had to prove that she could hold on to it. Maria called a meeting with the board and the senior executives, determined to take control of the narrative. She addressed the concerns head-on, acknowledging the challenges the company was facing while presenting her clear vision for the future. She didn't shy away from the criticisms, but instead used them as an opportunity to showcase her leadership and strategic thinking. "I know some of you are questioning the direction we're headed in," Maria said, her voice firm, "but I'm here to assure you that my vision is what's best for this company. We can't continue to live in the shadow of the past. We need to innovate, to adapt, and to move forward. And I am the leader who will take us there." It was a bold move, and for a moment the room was silent. But then one by one the board members spoke up, voicing their support for Maria's leadership. They saw the fire in her eyes, the conviction in her words, and they realized that she wasn't just the new CEO, she was the right CEO. Despite the support Maria had gained, Robert wasn't ready to concede. He continued to undermine her, trying to sow doubt among the ranks. But this time Maria was ready. She had anticipated his moves, and she knew that if she was going to keep her position, she needed to confront him directly. One evening, after a tense board meeting, Maria called Robert into her office. She knew that this confrontation was inevitable, but she wasn't afraid. She had spent years learning how to play the game, and now she was ready to outplay him. "Robert, I know what you've been doing," Maria said, her voice steady. "You've tried to pit the board against me. You've planted doubt in the company, but I'm not going to let you take everything I've worked for." Robert sat across from her, his expression hardening. "You've done well, Maria, but you'll never replace me. This company is mine." Maria leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. "It was yours, Robert, but it's mine now, and I will take this company to places you never could." For the first time, Robert saw the woman he had once mentored as his equal, not just in capability but in ambition. He had underestimated her, and in doing so, in the weeks that followed, Robert's influence in the company dwindled. His supporters began to fade, and Maria's leadership became more secure. She continued to push the company forward, implementing the changes she had promised and solidifying her position as the true leader. Maria's rise wasn't just a victory over Robert. It was a victory over doubt, over fear, and over the obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. She had played the game better than anyone, and in doing so, she had secured her place at the top. The company flourished under her leadership, and Maria's legacy began to take shape. Robert's name faded from the company's halls, replaced by the new face of the business, Maria, the woman who had played the CEO's game and won.